We're here at the Bavarian Army Museum, and when you first enter the exhibition, that's 1500 to 1880. So the first thing you're greeted by is a bunch of two-handed greatswords. This is an interesting case where it might be kind of difficult to figure out which ones were for actual, military use and which ones were ceremonial. Now, at first glance, I'm not seeing any examples where I would immediately say, okay, that's 100% ceremonial. None of these are excessively large. Some definitely have a lot of decorative elements, but that doesn't exclude them from being functional war swords. This one right there with the complex hilt, I'm convinced that that's for military use. Also looking at the blade geometry. The one next to it, that's anyone's guess. I'm leaning more toward ceremonial on that one because it's quite bulky overall. It's fairly large. It looks like it would be heavier than what you would normally want to fight with, but that's just my guess. Let's see, is there any information? But the individual ones aren't labeled. So generally these are battle swords. That's what that term means. I apologize if the image quality is not ideal. It's pretty dim in here, which museums tend to be. You don't want to expose the originals to too much light. And you can see here this is quite an interesting one with the complex hilt. Get several rings. In fact, it's kind of reminiscent of a lot of rapier hilts. And then you have the simpler crossguard with the double ring. Generally, when I see elements like this, a bunch of extra pieces that are decorative, the rolled ends there, that's usually more indicative of parade swords than fighting swords because, it just adds extra mass that doesn't benefit you a whole lot. Whereas these here look more functional to me. Again, they might all be, and sometimes a bearing sword might look perfectly functional, what wasn't intended for use. So it can be a little difficult to say. This one here in particular is quite interesting. That is kind of an odd form of serration. Well, I don't even know if I want to call it serration. If you look at this pattern over here, that's the classic flamberge type, the wavy edge. These may very well have a different purpose to enhance the ability to bind, because right over here we have the polearms, and these battle swords would often be used against polearms. So you may very well want the serrations in order to bind them better and control them, pull them out of the way, etc. So it may not always be, the idea may not always be to cause more damage or generally be effective against either flesh or armor. Yeah, these paring hooks are large and solid. I wonder how some of these handle. Some of them look quite nimble when I look at the overall mass distribution. That's a speedum. Oh, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that before. I talked about these war forks before when talking about tridents. And, like I mentioned before, this is basically a form of trident. Tridents, the way they're often shown in fantasy, are not quite like that. But essentially, this is when you have two smaller blades and a long central one, but essentially, this is more obvious, right? This is a pretty obvious trident. I used to be fairly skeptical toward these in the sense that I always think it's better to have one point, because this way you're dividing the force between 2 points, right? But you also achieve 2 wounds at the same time, and I don't think that it's that significant, dividing the force between 2. It's still going to hit quite hard. There's a nice one as well. I mean, these are all nice, honestly, but it's a good example. This is kind of, if you think about it, this is kind of like a sai as a polearm, right? Because you have the two shorter forks and a long central spike. I wish I could show the size. These are a lot smaller than you might think when you see just a picture. It looks like the base is not much larger than the palm of my hand. And in pictures you might get the wrong idea and think they're much larger. And we got the morning star. So I've probably already mentioned that before, but oftentimes when people hear the term morning star, they think of the spiked flail. But it's the hafted version, really. The blade on this speedum is extremely long. Very long and thin. You look at it from the side. It's definitely a thinner blade than you might guess. The same as this one here. That is also quite thin. And then when we look at the halberds there, it's a good look at the side profile. It's a bit tricky to get the focus just right. Okay, that should be in focus. So you can see those are not exactly chunky either. I mean, they have a certain thickness to withstand use against armor, but considering that, they are not bulky by any means. Because you really do not want any more material, any more mass than you need, because it just makes them that much more sluggish. That's an interesting form there as well. A curved blade along with the axe blade. So you have two very different impact points. You know, on the one hand, with the curved blade, you would try to hit normally in the upper third, and you can see that it widens there too. And then the axe part is much, much lower. Right? And here, there's another good look at the way they're hafted. This shows you the kind of craftsmanship you're dealing with, as opposed to a lot of reproductions that just slap the langets on, onto the surface. Whereas these here, so you can see they're actually more or less flush. Not all of them equally, but generally they are flush with the handle, which not only looks better, it also makes them easier to handle, right? Because that way you can slide the hand up and down if need be to change the grip without catching on anything. Well, there's a type that personally I've not seen before. I don't even know what you call that. I suppose you can always call it a form of battle axe. This looks like one of those cases that might be derived from an agricultural tool. I always like to showcase historical craftsmanship because of all the attention to detail. If you look at the lines, how sharp they are, you would generally not see that in reproductions on the current market unless it's high-end. You know, there are absolutely bladesmiths who will do this, but most of the things you get are just not that complex. It changes cross-section. It starts out the way you normally expect a blade to do, and then the cross-section basically rotates 90 degrees, so it becomes flat up there, which is quite interesting. I wonder why they decided to do that. It's not necessary. It looks great, but functionally I don't see a purpose for it in particular. Maybe there's one. Oh wow, I just noticed how thin this halberd is. It's so thin, I'm gonna have trouble getting it in focus. Okay, there we go. You can see it's bent too, unsurprisingly. And it's remarkably thin. I can't imagine that would last terribly long in battle. That is interesting. I mean, in some cases they might have made them with the intention of being more or less one-time use. You know, disposable weapons. I mean, these are a little too fancy for that, I would think. But I'm not entirely sure. So in the foreground, we have another axe. I suppose you could call it a bardiche. Not entirely sure on this one. I would just call that a battle axe. That's more like a bardiche with the longer blade. Basically, when it comes to axes, the sky's the limit. There's so many different forms, and a lot of what you see in fantasy, unless it's way too large and crazy with all the spikes and whatnot, there's a good chance that you would find something fairly similar in history. I mean, they were not standardized by any means. There was such an enormous variety in the 16th and 17th century in particular. We can see very well the langets here. Beautiful work on that. There's another bardiche, quite a slender one. Remarkably narrow blade, really, whereas the handle is quite massive. Short, too. At first I was wondering if it broke off, but no, that looks like the end is carved, so that's definitely the original length. Well, okay, I suppose it could have been modified later. A halberd with 2 spikes on the side. With the spikes, the question is always, were they intended for striking, or was it more for parrying, hooking, binding, etc.? And then there in the back, we have an all pike. This was a particular form that was popular in Germany and Austria. So essentially, much like an S-talk, you have basically a square cross-section, looks like. So it's just a spike, there's no edge on it, and then you have the disc guard. There's a warhammer with a beak. This kind of claw here is better at digging into armor. So that way you have 3 smaller points of contact as opposed to 1 large, and you might be better able to dent the armor that way. Spike on top, and then the beak on the other end to punch holes into armor. Again, note the langets on the haft. They're inset. This axe here also kind of stands out. That axe head is significantly smaller than my hand. And I mean, that's really all you need. There's still going to be plenty of force applied to the target. More hammers. Even in armor, that would not be pleasant to be hit by. Neither would that flail. I mean, or anything here, obviously. And there's a glaive in the background. There are different forms of glaives. Some have these additional spikes to pull riders off the horse. Again, they would also be useful for controlling weapons, hooking them, all of that. There is a classic example of that. This one is extremely thin. And you can see there's a bend in it too. That might have happened after the fact. Because normally when edge damage was repaired, you see usually a dip in the edge at that point. Spears and pikes. That one on top there is a remarkably small point. That is tiny. That's not much larger than an arrowhead, really, or like a javelin head. Morning stars. Sometimes they're called holy water sprinkler. So this is a simple version here. It's all wood, aside from the spikes, obviously. And the other ones, so the heads seem to be made of steel. I'm guessing still could be iron, I suppose. And they do have langets as well. Long spikes on those. I'm working on a couple more videos with footage from this museum. Until then, hope you liked this one and thanks for watching.